I'm delighted to endorse and support Joe Biden for president.
I give you the next president of the United States, Joe Biden.
There you see the scenes from last night on the eve of Super Tuesday. Two of Biden's former competitors, now his supporters. But the party still fractured, with the moderate wing represented by Biden and Mike Bloomberg up against the liberal wing, meaning Bernie Sanders and, to a degree, Elizabeth Warren. Now, Biden, he has been going after Sanders, especially over Bernie wanting to tear down Obamacare and also over this.
When we rallied together to defend our president and all the progress he made, they had his back, he had his back, and you had his back. But back in Washington, there was one guy with another plan.
I think it would be a good idea if President Obama faced some primary opposition.
Well, joining us now, Democratic strategist Michael Starr Hopkins. He served on the presidential campaigns of both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And you know, Michael, I saw an interesting piece today in the Times. You probably saw it also, which is this has been a slow-moving crisis that's been building for the party. A lot of people saw early on, especially those 41 freshman Democrats, most of which in swing districts, saying, we can't have Bernie Sanders at the top of the ticket. Let's rally around a moderate candidate and prevent, this problem from happening. And here we are on Super Tuesday. And while there has been rallying around Biden, it's really only come in the last 24, 48 hours. To that end, use California as an example. How worried are you that this coalition's come together too late?
I don't think there's any real way of knowing until we get the results tonight. But I will say, if you look at a lot of the polls, especially the polls in North Carolina, Virginia, and Texas, it looks like Biden's support is really starting to materialize. Texas, a state that a couple days ago, Democrats thought Bernie Sanders would win, now looks to be in the Joe Biden column. So, the coalescing of the party around Joe Biden, I think, is a real thing.
He get 15% at least in California. Otherwise, it almost could be game, set, match with 400 plus delegates going all to Bernie, theoretically.
Yeah, I think Joe Biden will get 15%. It'll be interesting. I think there's a chance Elizabeth Warren could potentially get 15%, either Warren or Bloomberg, depending on kind of where voters go. But I think having Buttigieg out of the race, having Klobuchar out of the race, I think that benefits the other candidates that aren't Sanders.
Speaking of Sanders, as I mentioned before, you worked on not only President Obama's presidential campaigns, but also you worked for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. This is what she had to say about Bernie recently, and she ain't holding back, Michael. She said, speaking about Bernie Sanders, was in Congress for years. He had one senator support him. Nobody likes him. Nobody wants to work with him. He got nothing done. He was a career politician. It's all just baloney, and I feel so bad that people got sucked into it. To that end, just how bitter is the divide that still exists from 4 years ago in the last campaign? And more than that, how do you envision even a President Obama, who apparently got on the phone with Mayor Pete and didn't tell him what to do, but certainly didn't dissuade him from getting behind, Joe Biden, how much do you see the last two Democratic nominees getting invested in this process, even before Milwaukee?
Well, here's what I'll say about the Sanders campaign and their supporters. One of the big complaints I have is that they consistently allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. And what that means is someone like me, who I consider myself a progressive, agree with Senator Sanders on probably 60, 70% of his issues. But because I don't agree with him on 100% of the issues, I'm consistently and constantly, called a corporatist or an elitist or part of the establishment. And after a while, people get sick of it. And so the Sanders campaign and their supporters are going to have to find a way to be able to compromise with the rest of the Democratic Party, because what they can't do is hold the Democratic Party hostage. And that's kind of been what their threat has been over the last, 6 to 8 years.
But to me, Michael, it seems like they're willing to carry out the threat. It's not just talk. I mean, you speak, obviously a lot of folks within Hillary's camp, and I do as well, they believe it totally was within the capacity of Senator Sanders, if he wanted to get his folks behind him, and he didn't do that. And maybe they felt that the DNC had their finger on the scale here for Hillary, and maybe there's even some legitimacy as to some of the complaints to a degree. But nonetheless, part of the reason we have Donald Trump as president is because Bernie didn't marshal up the forces here, or they didn't go along. and that's where we are. So if the number one election issue, number two and number three is beat Trump, isn't it time to stop waiting for Team Bernie to get on board here? I saw a poll that only 52% of his supporters, if he's not the nominee, will support the eventual Democrat. They'll either break for Trump or stay at home, the other ones. I think we already know how this play ends if he doesn't win.
Well, I will say that I think Senator Sanders is obligated to give a full-throated endorsement if he is not the nominee, just like if he is the nominee, supporters of Joe Biden, supporters of Amy Klobuchar, Buttigieg, and other candidates will support him. You know, like I said, I don't agree with Sanders on everything, but I will still support him if he's the nominee. And I expect his supporters to do the same thing, because another 4 years of President Trump will be an existential threat to our country.
If Sanders is the nominee, I can tell you for a fact, in our viewing area, there are a bunch of freshman Democrats right now who view their possible term in the House is going to be 2 years and say goodbye because they think they're going to be killed with down-ticket consequences of a Bernie Sanders socialist platform and candidacy at the top of the ticket. Are they right to be worried?
Oh, absolutely. But I will draw parallels to 2016 in the fact that Republicans believed after the Access Hollywood tape that down-ticket races would be destroyed. And Paul Ryan famously said, "I give you permission to run away from Trump." Well, you know, Republicans did really well at the top of the ticket and down ticket that year. So I think these things are kind of always up in the air, but I completely understand why Democrats are worried that Sanders would sink the ticket, because I'm worried about that. I absolutely am worried about that. His comments about Castro in Florida, his comments about fracking in Pennsylvania, those put moderates in a really tough position. And he has zero hope of passing Medicare for all if he doesn't have moderates on board.
Let's get this out of the way. I know you don't know, and I don't know what the heck's going to happen tonight here, but I'm asking you to make an educated guess, and God knows you got the resume for it. Do you think at the end of tonight, the difference between Biden and Sanders will be 100 delegates or less, or do you think that Sanders will have a bigger spread or a bigger lead than that when they're done counting the votes? And I know it won't even be at the end of tonight with these crazy rules. It might be a couple days from now. But when it's all said and done, what's the gap between the two frontrunners?
I think Biden's within 25 delegates.
Wow.
I think Biden's going to have a fantastic night in terms of Texas. I think he's going to win big in Texas. I think he's going to win big in Virginia. I think he's going to win decently big in North Carolina. And then those southern states, I think he's just going to rack up delegates.
And obviously Florida, or California, I should say, will go a long way to writing the final postscript. Michael Starr Hopkins, great job. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, when we come back, we're going to stay with Super Tuesday. ABC News political director Rick Klein, he'll join us with a look at what happens after the polls close and the votes are counted. Will the field actually get smaller, or will people like Bloomberg and Warren stay in, even if they don't have great nights?